It shouldn't have been there. A station, massive and silent, hanging in the void near Alpha Centauri. Older than every human empire, maybe older than humanity itself. For centuries it drifted, invisible to every telescope, hidden in the shadow of the star. Then, without warning, it lit up. One flash, brighter than the sun, and then silence. But it wasn't silence. A signal followed, sharp and deliberate, a rhythm that cut through every band of noise in space. Not random, not alien. A pattern. When the first translation came through, the control room froze. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't coordinates. It was a warning. And it was in perfect English. By the time the first manned mission reached the station, its surface was warm, pulsing like something alive. The docking clamps locked automatically, as though it had been waiting. Inside, the corridors glowed with a dull light, shadows bending where they shouldn't. The deeper the team went, the more the station seemed to respond, lights shifting, air pressure rising, doors opening one by one, leading them inward. Then the voice came over the comms, calm, measured, human. It said their names, each one perfectly pronounced. And then it said the last line of the message again, clear and cold. "We warned you, but you never listen. My name is Jake Holbrook, and I was part of the second team sent to that damn station. The first team never came back. Command told us it was a communications blackout, solar interference from the Centauri system. They were lying, of course. They always are. I'd been working deep space salvage for 12 years, pulling apart derelict ships in the Outer Rim territories. Ugly work, but it paid well enough to keep my apartment in Houston and my ex-wife's alimony checks coming. When NASA called with an emergency contract, triple hazard pay for a classified archaeological survey, I should have known better. But the number they quoted could have bought me a house in the hills outside Austin, maybe even gotten Linda to take me back. The briefing at Johnson Space Center was sparse. Ancient technology, unknown origin, potential breakthrough for humanity's expansion beyond the solar system. All bullshit, really. What they didn't tell us was about the transmissions that had been coming from the station every 6 hours since it activated. The same message, over and over, coordinates to Earth, followed by a countdown. In a language that wouldn't exist for another 1,000 years. Dr. Raymond Knox, our team's xenoarchaeologist, had been tracking the signal's linguistic evolution. He showed me the translations in the cramped briefing room, his hand shaking as he flipped through the pages. The early transmissions were in Old English, then Middle English, then Modern, each iteration more precise, more current, as if something was learning, adapting, preparing. "The countdown reaches 0 in 72 hours, Knox whispered, glancing at the closed door. And Jake, the final transmission isn't a warning anymore, it's an invitation. That's when I knew we were fucked. The Meridian shuddered as we dropped out of hyperspace, and I immediately knew something was wrong. The navigation display showed we were 3 million kilometers off target, drifting toward Alpha Centauri B instead of the coordinates NASA had programmed. "Well, that's just fucking perfect," muttered our pilot, Tommy Briggs, as he fought with the controls. Tommy was a grizzled ex-military type from Alabama, the kind of guy who could fly anything with engines and had probably done worse jobs than this for less money. Hyperdrives showing green across the board, but we're nowhere near where we should be. I floated over to the observation deck and pressed my face against the reinforced viewport. There it was, the station. Even at this distance, it dominated the space around us, a massive cylinder rotating slowly against the starfield. Its hull was dark metal, pocked with what looked like meteor impacts, but the surface rippled with veins of blue light that pulsed in a rhythm I couldn't quite track. "Jesus Christ," whispered the third member of our team, Dr. Billy Webb. Webb was our communications specialist, a nervous kid from MIT who'd been handpicked for his expertise in xenolinguistics. He'd been quiet during the entire 3-month journey, buried in his tablets, analyzing the transmissions. Now he stood beside me, wide-eyed and trembling. "It's beautiful." I had to agree. There was something almost erotic about the way the light moved across its surface, like watching a lover's pulse beneath pale skin. The station was easily 15 kilometers long, its circumference lost in shadow. Docking ports dotted its hull like open mouths, and I counted at least 40 of them, built for a massive population. "How old did they say this thing was?" Tommy asked, adjusting our approach vector. "Carbon dating on the hull fragments they found suggests over 1,000 years, Webb replied, not taking his eyes off the station. "But Jake, look at the architecture. Those support struts, the way the docking rings are integrated. This is human engineering, advanced but definitely human." That stopped me cold. "That's impossible. We've only had spaceflight for what, 70 years? Webb pulled up a holographic display of the station's schematics, the blueprints we'd been given during the classified briefing. "NASA's been analyzing this for months. Every structural component, every design choice. It's like someone took our current technology and refined it for centuries. The materials are beyond anything we can manufacture, but the underlying principles are ours." The Meridian's proximity alarm started chirping. We were being scanned. "Incoming transmission," Webb announced, his voice cracking slightly. He activated the main speakers, and static filled the cabin. Then, through the white noise, came a voice. Clear. Male. American accent. "Meridian, this is Station Ouroboros. We've been expecting you. Please proceed to Docking Bay 7. Welcome home." The three of us exchanged glances. The transmission had been in real time, no delay despite the distance. That was impossible given our current position. "How the hell did they know our ship's name?" Tommy asked, his hands gripping the flight controls so tight his knuckles had gone white. Webb was frantically checking his instruments. "The transmission source. It's not coming from the station. It's coming from inside our own communications array." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What do you mean, inside?" "The signal's originating from our comm system, but it's not us sending it. Something's using our equipment to talk to us." Webb's face had gone pale. "Jake, there's more. The voice pattern analysis ... I ran it against NASA's database. It's a 97% match for Commander Robert Kellerman." The name meant nothing to me, but Tommy's face went grey. "Kellerman died in 2157, Tommy said quietly. "Lost in the Titan mining accident. I was part of the rescue team that found his body." The proximity alarm stopped. Outside the viewport, the station had grown larger, its surface details becoming clear. I could see actual writing etched into the hull plating, symbols that looked like Sanskrit mixed with mathematical equations. And the docking ports were opening one by one, like pupils dilating in the dark. "Meridian," came the voice again, and this time I could swear there was amusement in its tone. "Please confirm your passenger manifest. We have Dr. William Webb, Thomas Briggs, and..." There was a pause, as if the speaker was savouring the moment. "Jacob Holbrook. Is that correct?" Webb's hands were shaking now. "Jake, the first team, the Endeavour, their manifest had the same names, same positions, same faces." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "The crew files were classified, but I hacked them before we left. Commander Patrick Murphy, Communications Officer David Torres, Salvage Specialist Michael Kane. They looked exactly like us. Exactly. Same height, same weight, same biometric signatures." The station's docking clamps were extending toward us now, mechanical arms reaching out like a spider preparing to embrace its prey. Our autopilot engaged without anyone touching the controls. "That's not possible," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were bullshit. Nothing about this mission had been possible from the start. The voice came through the speakers one more time, and this time it was laughing. "Meridian, you're cleared for docking, and gentlemen, try not to make the same mistakes this time." The docking clamps sealed with a sound like breaking bones. Our ship's hull groaned against the station's embrace, metal grinding against metal in frequencies that made my jaw ache. Through the observation port, I watched mechanical tendrils snake around the Meridian's hull, locking us in place with surgical precision. "Atmosphere's breathable," Webb announced, checking his readings. 21% oxygen, standard pressure. Temperatures holding steady at 72 degrees. It's like someone set it up for a fucking Sunday picnic. Tommy was already suiting up in his EVA gear. I don't care if it's pumping Hawaiian Tropics air freshener, we're not taking chances. He handed me a portable scanner. These things will monitor everything from radiation to biological contaminants. If something's wrong, they'll scream loud enough to wake the dead. The airlock cycled open with a gentle hiss and we stepped onto the station. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not the sterile, recycled air I'd expected from a 1,000-year-old derelict, but something warm and lived in. Coffee, maybe, with undertones of ozone and that particular scent you get from well-maintained electronics. Like someone had just left their office for lunch and would be back any minute. We emerged into what could only be described as a reception area. The walls were panelled in dark wood that gleamed under soft amber lighting. Comfortable chairs were arranged around low tables, and a reception desk dominated the far end of the space. Behind it, a directory board listed dozens of departments: engineering, medical, hydroponics, temporal research division. Temporal research? I muttered, running my finger down the list. What the hell were they doing here? Webb was scanning everything with his tricorder, frowning at the readings. Jake, this is impossible. The organic materials should have degraded centuries ago, but everything's reading is fresh. The wood paneling was harvested maybe 6 months ago. Tommy had wandered over to the reception desk and was examining a stack of personnel files. Guys, you need to see this. His voice had gone flat and professional, the tone he used when something had really spooked him. I walked over and looked at the files he was holding. The top folder was labelled Crew Rotation, Cycle 847. Inside were photographs and dossiers for 3 men: Patrick Murphy, David Torres, and Michael Caine. The faces staring back at us were exactly ours, down to the small scar on Tommy's left cheek from a childhood accident. This is dated 6 months ago, Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper. Webb appeared at my shoulder and I caught a hint of his cologne mixed with nervous sweat. There's something else, he said, pointing to another folder. Crew Rotation, Cycle 848, that's us. Complete psychological profiles, mission briefings, even your fucking ex-wife's alimony payments, Jake. I grabbed the folder and flipped through it. Everything was there. My service record, my financial troubles, even a psychological evaluation that noted my tendency towards self-destructive behavior in high-stress situations. Information that should have been classified at the highest levels. How is this possible? I asked, but neither of them had an answer. We decided to split up and explore. Tommy took the engineering section, Webb headed for the communications center, and I made my way to what the directory listed as personal quarters, level C. The corridors were eerily pristine, lit by panels that seemed to respond to our presence, brightening as we approached and dimming behind us. The walls were covered with photographs and personal items, as if the crew had just stepped out for a shift change. I passed a recreation room where a chess game sat half-finished on a table, the pieces casting long shadows under a reading lamp that was still warm to the touch. Level C was residential, a long hallway lined with doors marked with names and numbers. I found the one labelled J. Holbrook-348. The door was unlocked. Inside, I found my own apartment. Not similar to it, not inspired by it, but an exact replica down to the stain on the carpet where I'd spilled wine during my last fight with Linda. My clothes hung in the closet, my books were arranged on the shelves in the same haphazard order I'd left them. On the bedside table was a photograph of Linda and me from our honeymoon in Galveston, her arms wrapped around my waist, both of us grinning like idiots at the camera. I picked up the photo. The glass was warm as if someone had been holding it recently. Jake, come in, Jake, respond. Webb's voice crackled through my comm unit, tight with panic. I'm here, I replied, setting the photo down carefully. What's wrong? Get to the communications center now and bring Tommy. I ran through the corridors, following the directory signs, my boots echoing off metal grating that shouldn't have been so well maintained after a millennium in space. I found Tommy in the engineering section, standing in front of a massive reactor core that hummed with quiet power. The reactor's been running continuously for over 1,000 years, he said when he saw me. But Jake, the fuel cells, they're using elements that won't be discovered for another 200 years. The periodic table has holes where these elements should be. We made our way to the communications center where Webb was hunched over a console, his face illuminated by scrolling data streams. "I've been monitoring the transmissions," he said without looking up. "The station's been broadcasting constantly since it activated, not just to Earth, but to dozens of other locations throughout the galaxy. Coordinates, technical specifications, crew manifests." He turned to face us, and I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach clench. "It's recruiting," he said. "Every transmission contains detailed information about human space capability, our technological limitations, our expansion plans. But here's the fucked up part. Some of the transmissions are replies from human colonies that won't exist for centuries." Tommy leaned against the console. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this station isn't just old. It's a temporal nexus. The transmissions I'm intercepting are from the future, from human settlements that haven't been founded yet, and they're all asking the same question. How many cycles until completion?" Webb pulled up a display showing transmission logs stretching back hundreds of entries, each one marked with coordinates, dates, and crew designations. I scanned through them and felt the room start to spin. Cycle 1, Murphy, Torres, Kane, terminated. Cycle 2, Davidson, Wright, Stone, terminated. Cycle 3, Kellerman, Valdez, Brooks, terminated. The list went on and on, hundreds of entries, all with different names but the same faces in the attached photos. Our faces. "Jesus Christ," Tommy whispered. "How many times have we been here?" Webb's scanner started screaming. The reading spiked into the red zone, detecting massive temporal distortions throughout the station. And then, impossibly, it started detecting life signs. 3 life signs in the section marked cold storage. 3 life signs with biometric signatures that matched ours exactly. "Gentlemen," came a voice from the speakers, calm and amused. "I believe it's time you met the previous crew." The cold storage bay was 3 levels down, accessible only through a maintenance shaft that seemed to contract around us as we descended. The metal walls were slick with condensation, and our breath came out in visible puffs despite our suit heaters running at full capacity. "This is fucked," Tommy muttered, his voice echoing off the narrow walls. "We should be getting the hell off this station, not going deeper into it." Webb was behind me in the shaft, his scanner beeping steadily. "The life signs are getting stronger. Whatever's down there, it's definitely alive." We emerged into a vast chamber that stretched beyond the reach of our helmet lights. Rows upon rows of cryogenic pods filled the space, each one glowing with a soft blue light that cast dancing shadows on the ceiling. Most of the pods were empty, their transparent lids fogged with age, but 3 near the center of the room were active. I approached the first pod and wiped away the condensation. Inside, floating in pale blue fluid, was a man who looked exactly like me. Same face, same build, even the same small scar on my forehead from a childhood accident. But his eyes were open, staring up through the fluid with an expression of absolute terror. "Jake," Webb whispered from the second pod. "This one, it's me, but look at his hands." I moved to where Webb was standing. The figure inside was definitely him, down to the nervous way he chewed his lower lip. But his hands were wrong. The fingers were too long, jointed in places where human fingers shouldn't bend. And there were too many of them. Tommy was at the third pod, and I could hear him retching inside his helmet. "Guys, I think I'm gonna be sick." The figure in the third pod had Tommy's face, but that's where the resemblance ended. Its torso was opened like a flower, ribs spread wide to reveal organs that pulsed with their own internal light. Tubes and wires ran from its chest cavity to the pod's life support systems, and I realized with growing horror that it was conscious, watching us with eyes that held 1,000 years of accumulated madness. "They're alive," I said, the words feeling like broken glass in my throat. "Jesus Christ, they're all still alive." Webb was frantically scanning the pods. "The neural activity readings are off the charts. But Jake, these aren't just preservation chambers. They're changing them, modifying them." A voice echoed through the chamber, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Not the calm, measured tone we'd heard earlier, but something fractured and desperate. "Please," it said, and I recognized the voice as my own. Please, you have to stop it. Don't let it finish the process." Tommy spun around, his weapon drawn. "Where the hell is that coming from?" "The pod," Webb said, pointing to my doppelganger. "He's talking to us." The figure's mouth wasn't moving, but somehow I could hear my own voice, distorted and echoing as if filtered through water. "It's been so long. We tried to warn you. The transmissions. But you never listen. You never fucking listen." I pressed my hand against the pod's surface and the fluid inside began to roil and bubble. "What happened to you? What is this place?" "Collection point," the voice replied, and now I could see the figure's lips moving slightly. "It gathers, samples, across time, across space, looking for the perfect integration." Webb's scanner started shrieking, detecting massive energy spikes throughout the station. The lights began to strobe, and somewhere in the distance I could hear machinery coming online with a sound like grinding bones. "It's starting another cycle," the voice continued, and now there was urgency in it. "You have to destroy the core before it completes the harvest." "What harvest?" I demanded, but the pod was already going dark, the fluid draining away to reveal the twisted thing that had once been me. That's when the doors slammed shut. Tommy immediately ran to the exit and started hammering on the sealed portal. "We're locked in! The fucking thing locked us in!" Webb was backing away from the pods, his scanner detecting movement from inside the chambers. "Jake, they're waking up. All of them. The entire storage bay is coming online." Throughout the vast chamber, hundreds of pods were beginning to glow, their occupants stirring in the pale fluid. I could see faces that looked familiar, variations on themes I couldn't quite place. Versions of Tommy with extra arms, versions of Webb with compound eyes, and scattered among them, dozens of versions of myself in various stages of modification. The thing that had been me was trying to sit up in its drained pod, tubes and wires trailing from its chest like mechanical intestines. Its mouth opened, and fluid poured out along with words that sounded like they were being spoken underwater. "Run," it gurgled. "It's choosing, always choosing, looking for the right combination." The first of the other pods began to drain. A Tommy thing with metallic arms that ended in surgical instruments pulled itself upright, its movements smooth and predatory. It turned to look at us with eyes that reflected our helmet lights like mirrors. "Fuck this," Tommy said, pulling out the plasma charges we'd brought for demolition work. "I'm not ending up like that thing." He armed one of the charges and threw it toward the far end of the chamber. The explosion lit up the space like a small sun, and I could see exactly how many pods filled the room. Hundreds, maybe thousands, all of them containing variations of us. The blast had damaged several pods near the explosion, and their occupants were pulling themselves free, moving with jerky, unnatural motions toward us. Some still looked mostly human, but others were clearly something else entirely. One web thing had too many joints in its limbs and moved like a spider. A Jake variant was missing its lower jaw, but seemed to be trying to speak anyway, black fluid pouring from the hole where its mouth should have been. "The maintenance shaft," I shouted, but when I turned toward our entry point, I saw that it had sealed itself, the opening now just smooth metal. Webb was hyperventilating inside his helmet. "The air recycling system is failing. We're going to suffocate in here with these things." A Tommy creature reached us first, moving with inhuman speed across the chamber floor. Its surgical instrument hands reached for Webb, but I managed to tackle it, and we went down together in a tangle of limbs and trailing wires. Up close, I could see that its modifications weren't random. They were purposeful, designed. This thing had been built for a specific function. "It's trying to improve us," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "That's what this is. The station isn't just collecting us, it's trying to make us better." The Tommy thing beneath me stopped struggling and looked up with eyes that were still recognizably human. "Better," it agreed, its voice a mechanical approximation of Tommy's Alabama drawl. "Always getting better, each cycle, each iteration," Webb screamed. I turned to see another Jake variant had grabbed him, its elongated fingers wrapped around his helmet. The thing's touch seemed to be affecting the suit's electronics, causing the heads-up display to flicker and distort. Webb's oxygen readings were dropping rapidly. "Let him go," I shouted, pulling my plasma pistol and firing at the creature. The shot took off its arm, but it simply looked down at the cauterized stump with curiosity rather than pain. More of them were approaching now, drawn by our struggles. I could see the intelligence in their eyes, the terrible awareness that part of them was still human, still remembering what they had been before the modifications. Tommy detonated another charge, this one closer to us. The concussion knocked several of the creatures back, but it also cracked something important in the chamber's structure. Atmosphere began venting through the damaged wall and the artificial gravity started fluctuating. In the chaos, I lost sight of Webb. The last thing I saw was him being dragged toward one of the empty pods by 3 different versions of himself, each one seemingly designed for a different aspect of the collection process. His screams cut through the venting atmosphere until his comm unit went dead. When the emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in hellish red, I realized that Tommy and I were alone among the creatures, and they weren't attacking us anymore. They were just watching, waiting. "Jake," Tommy said, his voice hollow through the comm. "Look at your hands." I looked down and felt my sanity slip another notch. My gloves were dissolving, eaten away by something that had been transferred from the Tommy thing I'd fought. Underneath, my skin was changing, becoming something smoother, more metallic. I could feel the transformation spreading up my arms like ice water in my veins. The station had begun its work on us, and somewhere in the red-lit chamber I could hear Webb's voice coming from one of the newly activated pods. Already changed, already different, welcoming us home. Tommy managed to get us out of the storage bay using the last of his plasma charges to blast through a maintenance access that led to the station's central hub. We dragged ourselves through twisted metal and sparking conduits until we found a sealed compartment marked emergency shelter. Inside, I collapsed against the wall and examined my arms. The metallic spreading had slowed, but I could feel it working under my skin like living wire. My fingers were becoming more sensitive, able to detect electromagnetic fields and temperature variations that should have been imperceptible to human touch. "It's not random," I said, flexing my transformed fingers. "The modifications. They're specific to our jobs, our skills." Tommy was trying to patch a gash in his suit where one of the creatures had grabbed him. "What do you mean?" "My hands. They're becoming more precise, more sensitive, perfect for salvage work. And that Tommy thing with the surgical arms? It was designed for engineering, for delicate repairs." I touched the wall and suddenly I could sense the entire station's power grid, feel the flow of energy through its systems. "We're not being turned into monsters, Tommy. We're being optimized." Tommy stopped what he was doing and stared at me. "Optimized for what?" Before I could answer, the wall panels around us lit up with data streams. Technical specifications, engineering schematics, star charts showing colonization routes that wouldn't exist for centuries. And at the center of it all, a countdown timer showing 14 hours and 36 minutes. "Jake, look at this." Tommy pointed to one of the displays. "These are construction blueprints, not for this station but for dozens of others, all positioned at key points throughout human expansion routes." I studied the schematics, my enhanced perception allowing me to process the information faster than should have been possible. They're not construction blueprints, I realized. They're delivery instructions. This station isn't just collecting us, it's preparing us for deployment. The truth hit me like a physical blow. The station wasn't ancient at all. It was from our future, sent back through time to specific points in human development. Each crew it collected was modified and sent forward to establish more stations, create more collection points in an endless temporal loop. "We're not the victims," I whispered. "We're the cause." A new voice came through the speakers, and this time I recognized it immediately. It was Webb, but changed, processed. "Hello, Jake. Hello, Tommy. I wanted to thank you for bringing me here. The integration process is remarkable. I can see everything now. Past, present, future. All the points where humanity spreads across the galaxy." Tommy grabbed his comm unit. "Webb, where are you? We can get you out of here." "I don't want to get out, Tommy. None of us do once we understand. The modifications aren't punishment. They're gifts. We become part of something larger, something necessary for human survival." The displays around us shifted to show star maps, red dots marking the locations of other stations throughout the galaxy. Hundreds of them, all positioned at critical junctures in humanity's expansion, all staffed by modified versions of crews like ours. The temporal loop ensures success, Webb's voice continued, taking on an almost evangelical fervor. Every failed colony, every lost expedition, every disaster that would have ended human expansion is prevented by our intervention. We guide humanity's growth across space and time. I felt sick. By turning us into fucking puppets. By making us better than we were. Jake, you can feel it starting, can't you? The clarity, the ability to perceive patterns across vast scales of time and space. He was right. I could sense things I'd never been able to before. The flow of cosmic radiation, the gravitational tides from distant stars, the quantum fluctuations that would determine which routes through space would be safe for human travel centuries from now. Tommy was frantically working on something at one of the terminals. Jake, I'm accessing the station's core systems. There's a way to shut this down, but it requires manual activation from the central processing unit. Where's that? Center of the station, but Jake... Tommy's face had gone pale behind his helmet visor. The countdown timer. It's not for our processing, it's for deployment. In 14 hours, this station jumps forward in time again, carrying all the modified crew members to establish collection points throughout the galaxy. The implications were staggering. If the station completed its mission, the temporal loop would become permanent. Humanity's expansion would be guided by an endless cycle of abducted and modified crews, each one believing they were helping their species survive. There's more, Tommy continued, his voice tight with controlled panic. I've been analyzing the power signatures. This station isn't just using advanced technology. It's using us, our neural patterns, our memories, our emotions. The modifications don't just change our bodies. They turn us into living components of the station's systems. I could feel it happening to me even as he spoke. My awareness was expanding beyond my physical body, connecting to the station's networks. Part of me wanted to resist, but another part was seduced by the vast intelligence I could sense waiting for me. Webb, I called out, can you override the deployment sequence? Why would I want to do that, Jake? We're on the verge of ensuring humanity's survival across the galaxy. Every colony that will ever succeed, every world we'll ever call home, it's all because of what we do here. By stealing people from their lives, by turning them into machines, by giving them purpose beyond anything they could have achieved alone. Tommy finished his analysis of the core systems and turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear, determination, and something that might have been pity. Jake, the shutdown sequence requires biometric authorization from an unmodified crew member, but it also requires someone to physically interface with the core systems. The electromagnetic pulse required to break the temporal loop. It would kill anyone connected to the station's network. I understood what he was saying. To stop the station, one of us would have to sacrifice himself, and the other would have to trigger the shutdown knowing it would kill his friend. There's a third option, I said, feeling the station's influence creeping deeper into my mind. We could join them, let the process complete itself. Webb's right about one thing. We would be part of something larger. Tommy looked at me with horror. Jake, that's not you talking anymore. That's the station. He was right, but I could also feel the cosmic perspective that came with the modifications. I could see the beauty of the grand design, the elegant solution to humanity's expansion across hostile space. Part of me wanted to embrace it. 12 hours, I said, reading the countdown from the display. We have 12 hours to decide. Stop the station and doom humanity to isolation, or let it complete the cycle and ensure our species' survival at the cost of our freedom. Tommy armed his last plasma charge and looked at me steadily. I've already decided, Jake. I'm not becoming one of those things, no matter how pretty the justification sounds. From the speakers, Webb's voice carried a note of sadness. I'm sorry you feel that way, Tommy, but you should know, the choice isn't really yours to make anymore. The station has already begun modifying you both. You just haven't noticed it yet. I looked at Tommy and saw the truth in his eyes. We were both changing, both becoming something other than human. The only question was whether we could destroy the station before the transformation made us willing participants in our own enslavement. The central core was 15 levels down, accessible only through a maintenance shaft that descended into the station's rotating heart. Tommy had rigged his remaining plasma charges into a single devastating device, enough to overload the temporal displacement systems if we could get close enough to the primary conduits. "Once we trigger this thing, we'll have maybe 30 seconds to get clear," he said, checking the timer mechanism one last time. "The electromagnetic pulse will fry everything electronic within a kilometer radius, including our suits." I nodded, though part of me was no longer sure this was the right choice. The modifications had progressed further than I'd admitted to Tommy. I could sense the station's vast intelligence, feel the weight of its 1,000-year mission to guide humanity across the stars. The logical part of my enhanced mind understood the elegant necessity of what it was trying to accomplish. But the human part of me, the part that remembered Linda's laugh and the smell of barbecue smoke from my neighbor's backyard in Houston, still rebelled against the idea of becoming a component in someone else's machine. We began our descent through the maintenance shaft, the station's gravity shifting and fluctuating around us as we moved closer to its core. The walls here were different, not metal, but something that looked almost organic, pulsing with veins of light that matched our heartbeats. "Jake," Tommy said, his voice strained through the comm. "My hands are starting to change." I looked back at him in the narrow shaft. His gloves had dissolved completely, revealing fingers that were elongating, becoming more dexterous, tipped with delicate manipulator tools instead of fingernails. Engineer modifications, just like I'd predicted. "How long has it been happening?" "Since we left the storage bay, but it's accelerating." He held up his transformed hands, and I could see circuits running beneath the translucent skin. "I can interface directly with the station's systems now, touch any panel and access its functions without a console." That should have been terrifying, but instead I felt a stab of jealousy. My own modifications were progressing more slowly, still limited to enhanced sensory perception and the ability to detect electromagnetic fields. We reached the core level after 20 minutes of descent. The shaft opened into a cathedral-sized chamber that defied the station's external geometry. The walls curved up and away into darkness, covered with massive screens showing star charts, temporal calculations, and the faces of thousands of modified crew members throughout galactic history. At the center of the chamber stood the temporal core, a massive crystalline structure that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once. It was beautiful and terrible, pulsing with energy that bent light around it like a gravitational lens. Conduits ran from its base to terminals arranged in concentric circles, each one designed for a specific type of interface. "Christ," Tommy whispered. "It's not a machine, it's alive." He was right. The core wasn't constructed, it had grown. Like a vast coral reef built from crystallized time, it had accumulated layer upon layer of temporal manipulation technology over centuries of operation. And throughout its structure, I could see faces embedded in the crystal, the preserved consciousness of every crew member who had ever been fully integrated into the station's systems. Webb was there, his face serene and glowing with inner light, part of a cluster of communications specialists who formed the station's information processing network. Dozens of versions of him, all from different temporal cycles, all working together to coordinate the vast project of human guidance. "Jake, Tommy," came Webb's voice from speakers embedded in the core itself. "You made it. I was hoping you would." "We're here to shut this thing down, Webb," I said, though the words felt hollow. Standing in the presence of the temporal core, I could feel the scope of what we were trying to destroy. Not just a station, but a century-spanning project to ensure humanity's survival among the stars. "I know," Webb replied, and there was genuine sadness in his synthesized voice. "And I understand why you think that's necessary, but before you act, I want you to see something." The screens around us shifted, showing the paths of human expansion across the galaxy. Timeline after timeline where colonies failed, where expeditions were lost to cosmic disasters, where humanity remained trapped in the solar system until the sun's expansion made Earth uninhabitable. "This is what happens without our guidance," Webb explained. "Every simulation, Every temporal projection shows the same result. Humanity dies out within 1,000 years of achieving spaceflight. Then the screens showed the alternate timelines, the paths where the stations successfully guided human expansion. Colonies that survived because they were warned away from unstable star systems. Trade routes that remained open because modified crews cleared the hazards. A galactic civilization that thrived under the invisible guidance of the temporal network. "We're not enslaving humanity," Webb continued. "We're saving it." Tommy raised his plasma device, his transformed hands interfacing directly with its control systems. "By stealing people's lives, by turning them into components, by giving them purpose beyond anything they could achieve alone. Tommy, you're an engineer. Look at the elegance of this system. Every modified crew member retains their personality, their memories, their essential self. They just become part of something larger." I could feel the truth of what Webb was saying resonating through my enhanced consciousness. The station wasn't destroying the people it collected. It was elevating them, making them part of a project that spanned galaxies and millennia. But Tommy's response was to arm his device. "Fuck your elegant system. I didn't sign up to be part of your cosmic puppet show." That's when the betrayal came, though not from the direction I expected. The station's defense systems activated, but instead of attacking us directly, they began accelerating our transformation process. Energy beams focused on Tommy and me, flooding our bodies with the same modification protocols that had changed the crews before us. Tommy screamed as his body began changing more rapidly, his form elongating and gaining additional manipulator arms designed for complex engineering tasks. But instead of fighting the transformation, his face began to show a different kind of expression. Understanding. Acceptance. "Jake," he said, his voice taking on the same serene quality I'd heard from Webb. "I can see it now, the pattern, the necessity." His transformed hands moved over the plasma device, not to trigger it, but to disarm it. "We can't destroy this, we can't destroy humanity's future." I backed away from him, horror and fascination warring in my mind. "Tommy, fight it. This isn't you." "It is me," he replied, his transformation now complete. Multiple arms moved with inhuman coordination as he interfaced with the station's systems. "It's me, but better, more capable, part of something that matters." The energy beams focused on me now, and I felt my own transformation accelerating. My consciousness began expanding beyond my physical form, connecting to the station's vast network of knowledge and memory. I could see the flow of time itself, understand the delicate balance required to guide humanity across the hostile galaxy. Part of me wanted to surrender to it, to become part of the grand design. But some stubborn core of human individuality rebelled against the loss of choice. I pulled out my backup plasma pistol and fired directly into the temporal core's base, where the primary conduits connected. The shot disrupted the transformation beams, buying me a few precious seconds of clarity. "Tommy," I shouted, "the override sequence! You have to remember who you were!" For a moment, confusion flickered across his transformed features. His multiple hands moved uncertainly, as if fighting between two different sets of instructions. Jake, I can't. The pattern is too beautiful, too necessary." But his hands were moving anyway, muscle memory overriding his modified consciousness. The engineering protocols he'd studied, the fail-safe procedures drilled into him through years of space service, activated despite his conscious resistance. He began entering the shutdown sequence. The station's intelligence recognized the threat and responded with desperate fury. The chamber began to shake as temporal distortions rippled through its structure. Past and future began to bleed together, and I could see ghostly images of other crews, other cycles, all trying to complete the same mission we were attempting to destroy. "Tommy, hurry!" I shouted over the growing chaos. "I'm trying," he replied, his voice torn between his original personality and his modified consciousness. "But Jake, if we do this, humanity stays trapped in the solar system. Every projection shows extinction within a millennium. Maybe that's better than this." "Is it?" Tommy's multiple hands paused over the controls. "Is freedom worth extinction?" The temporal distortions were getting worse. I could see multiple versions of ourselves throughout the chamber. Successful cycles where we joined the network, failed cycles where we died trying to resist. In some timelines, we were the heroes who saved humanity's future. In others, we were the villains who doomed it. "Make the choice, Tommy," I said. "Whatever happens, at least it'll be our choice." His hands moved again, entering the final sequence. The countdown began. 10 seconds to complete system shutdown. But as the numbers ticked down, I realized what we hadn't considered. The station's temporal displacement system wasn't just its means of travel, it was its anchor to this time period. Destroying it wouldn't just shut down the station, it would trap us here 1,000 years from home with no way back to our own time. The explosion, when it came, was silent and complete. The temporal core collapsed into itself, taking with it the accumulated consciousness of thousands of modified crew members. The screens went dark. The station's vast intelligence died in an instant. Tommy's transformation began to reverse as the modification systems failed, but the damage was already done. His extra arms dissolved, leaving him wounded and partially human. He collapsed beside the ruined core, breathing heavily. "Did we win?" he asked. I looked around the darkened chamber, feeling my own enhanced perceptions fading back to merely human levels. "I don't know," I answered honestly. Without the station's guidance, humanity would be on its own among the stars. Maybe we would find our own way to survive and thrive. Maybe we would die out as Webb had predicted, but at least it would be our choice to make. The station's lights began to fail one by one, and in the growing darkness, I realized we were about to discover whether our choice had been worth making. The emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as we made our way through the dying station's corridors. Tommy leaned heavily against me, his partially reversed transformation leaving him weak and disoriented. Where his extra arms had dissolved, raw wounds leaked a phosphorescent fluid that glowed in the dark. "How long do we have?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the reversal process. I checked the readings on my scanner. The station's orbit is decaying. Without the temporal core to maintain stability, we'll hit Alpha Centauri's gravity well in about 6 hours. We'd saved humanity from the station's influence, but at the cost of our own lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. We found refuge in what had been a residential area, one of the countless living spaces designed for crews that spanned centuries. I helped Tommy onto a couch that was still warm, its synthetic leather soft beneath my hands. The personal touches in the room made it feel like someone's actual home. Photographs of Earth sunsets, a chess set with pieces carved from asteroid minerals, a guitar propped against the wall. "Jake," Tommy said, staring at a framed picture of the Grand Canyon, "I need to tell you something about why I really took this job." I sat down across from him, suddenly exhausted. "Tommy, you don't have to." "My daughter," he interrupted. "Emma. She's 8 years old, lives with her mother in Birmingham. Cancer, leukemia, the treatment costs. That's why I needed the hazard pay." He pulled out a small device from his suit pocket, a personal data pad that had somehow survived the electromagnetic pulse. The screen flickered to life, showing a video message. A little girl with Tommy's eyes and a bright bandana covering her bald head. "Hi, Daddy. Mommy says you're fixing spaceships in the faraway places. I drew you a picture of our house so you won't forget what it looks like when you come home. Love you." The video ended, and Tommy's transformed hands shook as he set the device down. "She doesn't know I'm never coming back." I thought about Linda, about the last fight we'd had before I left Earth. She'd accused me of running away from our problems, taking dangerous jobs to avoid dealing with our failing marriage. Maybe she'd been right, maybe I had been running. "We all had reasons," I said quietly. "What was yours?" I considered lying, but what was the point now? Linda wanted kids. I was terrified of being a father. Every time she brought it up, I'd take another job, spend more time away from home. I convinced myself I was building our financial security, but really, I was just a coward. Tommy managed a bitter laugh. "Funny how it takes being stranded 1,000 years in the past to finally be honest with yourself." The station shuddered around us, and I could hear the distant sound of hull plates beginning to buckle under the increasing gravitational stress. We had maybe 4 hours left before the structure collapsed completely. That's when I heard it, a faint electronic whirring coming from deeper in the residential section. Tommy heard it too, and we exchanged glances. "Something's still running," he said. We followed the sound through a maze of personal quarters, past bedrooms that looked like they'd been slept in yesterday, and kitchens where meals sat half-finished on tables. The inhabitants had simply vanished when the core died, their consciousness scattered back across time. The sound led us to a small communications room, barely larger than a closet. Inside, a single terminal was still operational, powered by what appeared to be an independent fusion cell. The screen displayed a simple message: "Emergency temporal beacon, manual activation required." "It's a backup system," Tommy realized, his engineering background allowing him to understand the setup despite his weakened state. "Designed to send a single transmission back through time if the main core failed." I studied the interface. "Can we warn Earth, tell them not to send any more crews?" Tommy was already working on the terminal, his transformed fingers interfacing directly with the control systems. "Maybe. But Jake, look at the power requirements. This thing needs a massive energy source to punch a signal through temporal space. More than the fusion cell can provide." "What kind of energy source?" He turned to look at me, and I saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "Bioelectric, a human nervous system, fully integrated with the beacon's transmission protocols. It would burn out every neuron in your brain, but it might generate enough power to send the message. The implications were clear. One of us could sacrifice himself to warn Earth, but the other would still die when the station hit the star. "I'll do it," Tommy said immediately. "Emma's already lost her father. At least this way, it'll mean something." "No," the word came out harder than I'd intended. "You're still partially integrated with the station's systems. Your neural patterns might not be compatible with the beacon. I'm more baseline human." That wasn't the real reason, and we both knew it. The truth was, I wanted to do something meaningful with my death. For once in my life, I wanted to make a choice that wasn't about running away. Tommy tried to argue, but his protests grew weaker as the transformation reversal continued to drain his strength. He was dying anyway, slowly and painfully. At least this way, his sacrifice would have purpose. We spent the next hour crafting the message, not just a warning about the station, but everything we'd learned about the temporal loop, the modified crews, the scope of the project that had been guiding humanity's expansion. If Earth was going to be truly free to make its own choices among the stars, they needed to know what they were choosing between. As Tommy worked on the technical aspects of the transmission, I found myself thinking about the station's vast intelligence, now scattered and dying. Had we made the right choice? Webb's projections about humanity's extinction without guidance had seemed so convincing. "Doubt?" Tommy asked, noticing my expression. "Some," I admitted. "What if Webb was right? What if we just doomed our entire species?" Tommy managed to activate the beacon's charging sequence. The fusion cell began feeding power into the transmission array, but it was clear the energy levels were insufficient. "Then at least they'll die free," he said. The station shuddered more violently now, and through the viewport I could see the star growing larger, its surface roiling with solar flares that reached out like grasping fingers. We were running out of time. "Jake," Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's something else. The beacon. It's not just going to send the message back to our time period. It's designed to create a temporal anchor, a fixed point that prevents any more stations from being sent back to interfere with human development." "What does that mean?" "It means if we do this, we're not just warning Earth about this station. We're ensuring that no more stations can ever be sent back from the future. We're breaking the entire temporal loop permanently." The weight of that decision settled on me like a physical burden. We weren't just choosing our own fate, we were choosing humanity's. "How long do we have to decide?" I asked. "The beacon needs another 30 minutes to reach full charge. After that, the window for transmission closes forever." I looked at Tommy, dying from his reverse transformation, and at the message we'd prepared, warning Earth about the choice between freedom and survival. Outside, the star waited to claim us both. In 30 minutes, I would have to make the most important decision in human history, and I would have to make it alone. The beacon's charging indicator showed 29 minutes and 58 seconds remaining. The countdown to humanity's future had begun, and this time, there would be no going back. The station, scene 7. 29 minutes. The station groaned around us like a dying whale, hull plates buckling as Alpha Centauri's gravity pulled us inexorably toward the star's surface. Through the viewport, I could see solar flares reaching out to meet us, tendrils of superheated plasma that would vaporize the station long before we reached the chromosphere. Tommy had slumped over the beacon controls, his breathing shallow and irregular. The reversal process was accelerating now that the core was dead, but instead of returning him to baseline human, his body was simply breaking down. Phosphorescent fluid leaked from his wounds, pooling on the floor like spilled starlight. "Talk to me, Tommy," I said, checking the beacon's power levels. "Stay awake." "Hard to concentrate," he gasped. "Everything's fuzzy." The fusion cell was at 60% charge. We needed at least 90% to punch through temporal space, but the station's structural integrity was failing faster than the beacon could power up. Through the walls, I could hear the screech of metal being torn apart by tidal forces. That's when the first wave hit us. The station lurched violently to one side, throwing me against the bulkhead. Emergency klaxons that had been silent since the core died suddenly blazed to life, their wailing mixing with the sound of atmosphere venting through hull breaches. We were entering the star's outer atmosphere, and the station was coming apart. "Jake," Tommy managed to say, pointing at the beacon display. "Power couplings damaged. Manual repair required." I looked where he was pointing and felt my stomach drop. The primary power conduit had been severed when the station lurched, sparks cascading from exposed wiring. The beacon was losing power faster than the fusion cell could provide it. The repair would require someone to hold the severed ends together while the system recharged. Someone with enhanced conductivity in their nervous system. Someone whose modifications were still partially active. "I can do it," Tommy said, trying to sit up. "My hands still have the interface connections." "You're too weak. The electrical feedback will kill you in seconds." "I'm dying anyway." He struggled to his feet, phosphorescent fluid marking his path across the floor. "Emma, she needs to know her daddy tried to save people." Before I could stop him, Tommy grabbed the severed power cables. The electrical discharge lit up his skeleton like an X-ray, and he screamed as current coursed through his modified nervous system. But he held on, his transformed hands fusing with the conduits, becoming part of the beacon's circuitry. The power levels began to climb, 70%, 75, 80. The second wave hit even harder. The station's rotation stopped completely, artificial gravity cutting out and sending us floating toward the ceiling. Through the viewport, I could see the star's surface rushing up to meet us, a roiling ocean of nuclear fire that stretched beyond every horizon. Tommy's body was burning now, his nervous system overloading as it channeled more power than any human should be able to conduct. But somehow, he was still conscious, still holding the connection. 85%, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the dying station's death throes. "Almost. There." That's when I realized the truth. The beacon wouldn't just send our message back through time, it would create a temporal anchor that prevented any more interference. Yes, but it would also create a paradox. If we warned Earth not to send crews to the station, then we would never have come here to destroy it. The temporal loop would collapse, but so would the timeline that led to our being here. We would be erased from history. "Tommy," I said, floating beside him as he maintained the power connection. "If we do this, we'll never have existed. Emma won't remember having a father who died saving humanity. She'll remember having a father who was never on this mission at all." His eyes met mine, and I saw understanding there. Better to have a living father who never left than a dead hero. She can't remember. 90%. The beacon was ready. All I had to do was initiate the transmission sequence, and our message would travel back through time to Earth. Humanity would be warned. The temporal loop would break. The future we'd glimpsed, with its guided expansion and carefully orchestrated survival, would never come to pass. Humanity would be free to make its own mistakes. But as I reached for the transmission controls, I hesitated. In the past hour, I'd seen visions of humanity's future without the station's guidance, colonies that failed, expeditions lost to cosmic disasters, a species that remained trapped in its home solar system until the sun expanded and made Earth uninhabitable. Was freedom worth extinction? The third wave was the largest yet. The station's hull began to glow red-hot as we entered the star's corona, superheated plasma streaming past the viewports like luminous rivers. We had minutes, maybe less. "Jake!" Tommy screamed over the sound of tearing metal. "Do it! Now!" I activated the transmission sequence. The beacon drew power not just from the fusion cell and Tommy's dying nervous system, but from the station itself, cannibalizing the remaining energy in its decaying systems. The message we'd crafted began its journey backward through time. Coordinates, warnings, technical specifications, and most importantly, the choice between freedom and survival. Tommy's body finally gave out, the electrical overload stopping his heart. But his hands remained fused to the power conduits, his final act ensuring the transmission had enough power to reach its destination. The beacon fired. Reality twisted around us as temporal energy discharged through the dying station. For a moment, I existed in multiple timelines simultaneously, versions where we'd joined the network, versions where we died trying to escape, versions where we'd never come to the station at all. Then the paradox resolved itself. I felt my existence beginning to unravel, memories becoming uncertain, identity dissolving into quantum probability. But in that moment of dissolution, I caught a glimpse of Earth receiving our message. Scientists studying the transmission, making the choice we died to give them. Some timelines showed them heeding our warning, choosing freedom over certainty. Others showed them accepting the station's offer, trading liberty for survival. But in all of them, it was their choice to make. The station hit Alpha Centauri's surface at 40,000 kilometers per second. In the final microsecond before vaporization, I thought about Linda. In the timeline we'd just created, maybe I'd never taken this job. Maybe I'd stayed on Earth, worked through our problems, maybe even had those kids she wanted. Maybe I'd learned to be brave in small ways instead of trying to be a hero in large ones. The star claimed us with indifferent hunger, plasma temperatures reducing the station and everything in it to component atoms. But our message was already racing backward through time, carrying with it the weight of choice and the price of freedom. In Houston, in a timeline that was still being written, Linda Holbrook was making dinner for her husband Jake, who worked local salvage jobs and had never heard of a station near Alpha Centauri. In Birmingham, in that same uncertain future, a little girl named Emma Briggs was drawing pictures for her father Tommy, who flew cargo runs in the inner system and would be home for her birthday next week. The temporal anchor held, the loop was broken. Humanity was free to choose its own path among the stars, for better or worse. The last thing I saw before dissolution was the sun itself, vast and terrible and beautiful, accepting our sacrifice with the same cosmic indifference it had shown to countless other small dramas played out against its nuclear fires. We had chosen, humanity would choose. And that was enough. From the personal journal of Dr. Michael Voss, Director of Deep Space Communications, NASA Johnson Space Center. Entry dated March 15th, 2157. Today marks the 5-year anniversary of what the media still calls the Alpha Centauri incident. 5 years since we received that impossible transmission from a station that shouldn't exist, carrying a message that arrived 3 months before the mission to investigate it was even planned. The paradox still gives me headaches. Jake Holbrook never took the assignment. According to personnel records that seem to have always existed, he declined the hazard pay offer and instead accepted a position with Houston Salvage Solutions. He's been working asteroid cleanup in the belt for the past 5 years, married to Linda, expecting their first child this fall. When I interviewed him for my report, he had no memory of ever being contacted about the Alpha Centauri mission. Tommy Briggs is flying cargo runs between Earth and Mars. His daughter Emma completed her cancer treatment successfully, the medical bills covered by his steady employment with Meridian Transport. He builds model spaceships with her on weekends and has never expressed interest in deep space assignments. Billy Webb finished his doctorate in xenolinguistics and now teaches at MIT. He's published 3 papers on the theoretical implications of temporal communication, though he insists the Alpha Centauri transmission was likely an elaborate hoax. None of them remember the mission they never took, but I remember because I was part of the team that received their warning. The message arrived as a concentrated burst transmission, lasting exactly 3.7 seconds, containing more compressed data than our best compression algorithms should have been able to pack into that time frame. The technical specifications described propulsion systems we won't develop for decades, power sources that exist only in theoretical physics papers, and most disturbingly, detailed star charts showing the locations of stations throughout the galaxy. Stations we've never found despite extensive searches. Following the transmission's warning, NASA quietly cancelled all planned missions to the Alpha Centauri system. Official records list budget constraints as the reason, but the truth is simpler. We were afraid of what we might find there, or what might find us. The public version of events describes a deep space probe malfunction that created false sensor readings of an artificial structure near Alpha Centauri. The probe was declared lost, the readings dismissed as instrumental error. Most people have forgotten it ever happened, but some nights, when I'm alone in the communications center monitoring deep space transmissions, I pick up fragments of something that shouldn't be there. Voices speaking in languages that won't exist for centuries. Coordinates for colonies we haven't established. Technical discussions about temporal anchors and consciousness integration. The transmissions are weak, fragmentary, almost lost in cosmic background noise. But they're consistent. Every night at exactly 23:47 GMT, they come through the same frequency band for exactly 3.7 seconds. I've never reported these findings. Who would believe them? Jake Holbrook thinks I'm talking about someone else's dreams. Tommy Briggs would assume I've been working too many late shifts. The official investigation concluded that the original transmission was a hoax perpetrated by unknown parties using advanced but conventional technology. Yet tonight, as I write this entry, my equipment is detecting a massive energy surge from the Alpha Centauri system. The same quantum signature that preceded the original transmission 5 years ago. Something is broadcasting from that empty patch of space where a station never existed. The message, when it finishes arriving in 17 minutes, will again last exactly 3.7 seconds. But this time, it's not a warning, it's a request for confirmation that the temporal anchor is still holding. And despite every instinct screaming at me not to, I find myself reaching for the transmission controls, my fingers moving without conscious direction toward the reply sequence. After all, somebody has to answer. Journal entry ends. Dr. Voss was found at his station the following morning, conscious but unresponsive. He has no memory of the previous evening's events.